What's up, everyone? Today we're going to continue talking about Terraform and look at variables. Variables allow you to pass in information to your Terraform configuration to make it more dynamic and not to hard code all your values, something that makes your Terraform configuration code that you're working with just more versatile, just like you would do with PowerShell or any other type of scripting or programming language. As always, this code will be available out in my GitHub repository. I'll include a link to it down below, as well as a link to this playlist where we're going over introductory topics in regards to Terraform. My name is Jeff. This is Jeff Brown Tech. Let's go ahead and get started. Here we are back in our Terraform configuration that we've been working with and just talking a little bit about what's in here. I always try to just do a quick recap in case you're coming across this video separate from the rest in this playlist. We're working with some providers with local and our random providers from HashiCorp. And all we're doing is creating files on our local file system. Here's one called Hello World with some content in it. We're generating some random pet names and integers and using those to create another file with some content in here and then outputting it. And right over here, we have our files that we've created and everything. We have some hard-coded values here. We have the content of our file, or the name here is just hello-world.txt. But maybe we want to make this a little bit more dynamic. We want to be able to apply this in multiple scenarios or, have a different file name and everything. So that's where variables come into play. Now, the first thing we need to do here is we need to define our variables and include some different information about them. Now, what we can do is when you're working inside of Terraform, all our Terraform files have the .tf file extension here, but you can have multiple .tf files within your root module here, your root configuration. And what Terraform will do is when you go do a plan, it will look for all the TF files and just automatically, merge them all together, basically. So a good practice, you could define your variables right here inside the main file, but best practices say, let's create a separate TF file here. Let me get back up into my root, and we're going to call this variables.tf. Now inside of here, we're going to start defining the different variables we want to use inside our configuration. We do this starting with the variable keyword. And of course, if you have the Terraform or HashiCorp extension installed here in Visual Studio Code, it's going to autocomplete here. And if I just press enter, it's going to start building out our variable definition here. We have the keyword variable, and then what are we going to name our variable? I'm just going to say file name 1 because we might have multiple ones here. And then within our curly brackets here, we have a couple of different things we can define for our variable. Actually, I was just looking at the documentation. Some of these are actually all optional, apparently, which is very interesting because I can't imagine defining a variable without, specifying any of these. But we'll just go with this right now. Best practices. First, what is your variable? What type of variable is it? You can see in our autocomplete here, we have a couple different options. We have a bool or boolean, which is just true or false. We have a list of different items, a map of different items, just a number or a string, a set, object, tuple. Very basic. You don't have to worry about like floating point numbers or, anything different like that. You're just talking about numbers. So very, very basic data types that we have here. In this case, a file name, that's going to be a string. Let's just say string right here. Another property we have for a variable is a description. We can just put this in here. It's just a sentence inside of quotes here. This is the file name for file name 1, whatever, pretty basic there. All right, so at a minimum, let's just stick with this for right now. We have our type and our description. I'm going to format this file here real quick, get everything lined up. We talked about formatting our documents or formatting our files in a different video there. And great. Okay, we have a variable definition here. Let's go, try something out here real quick. Let's do a Terraform validate. Everything looks good. Don't have any issues there. And let's do a Terraform plan. Now you can see it's prompting us for the value of file name 1, our variable here. Basically, Terraform is going through and seeing we have a variable definition here, and we need to provide it some type of value so we can go create the plan here. I'll just also say, file name 1, and that's great. But we see there's no changes made. Well, we actually haven't used this variable inside our configuration or done anything with it just yet. So let's get rid of that real quick. Let's go back into main. And let's just go create another file here. I'm going to copy this here. We're going to take out hello world. We'll call it file. Well, we'll say file 1. We'll leave the content at hello world, and let's come into here. Now, if you're putting a variable inside a string like we have here, you can see GitHub or maybe Copilot here is automatically doing an autocomplete here. But if you want to include a variable like a string inside of another string here, like for our file name, you're going to do $, open and close curly brackets. To reference a variable, you're going to say var or for var dot, and then the file name. In this case, I'm also getting this autocomplete, this IntelliSense here with the file name that I have available to me right now. And that will say file name 1.txt. Okay, let's save that. We've now included our variable inside a resource definition. If we bring back up our command window here, going to say Terraform plan. It's going to prompt us for the file name. I will say, let's change it up. Let's say my file. We'll press enter and it comes up. It's going to say, okay, we're going to create this new local file inside of Terraform. We're going to refer to it as file 1. The file name is going to be files and then my file, which is what I passed in, .txt. Perfect. So that looks like that's worked there. Let's just do a Terraform apply. I'm going to do an auto approve because we've talked about that. It won't prompt me for. Again, I have to put in my file name here that I want. So I'll put in my file. Perfect. Went through, created everything. And then here is my file right here. All right. So hopefully you're watching this process right now saying, okay, this is great. We can define variables. We can include them in resource definitions here to make things more dynamic. I can make this file name whatever I want it to, but I'm running my Terraform plan and my Terraform applies, and it's prompting me for this. How can I maybe automatically provide these values here for me? There are two different ways we can do that. Let's clear this out here. Let's do a Terraform plan. Let's go back up here. What we can do, one way is do Terraform plan. And we have a command line reference here, a command line argument. We can say -var, meaning we're going to pass in the name or the value of a variable that we have defined. We'll first do the name of the variable. So, file name 1 equals, and then we'll say my file name command line, just so we can prove that it came from the command line. Go ahead and press enter. Now, in this case, we did not get prompted to put in our file name because we provided it via the command line there. And in this case, since this file is already created, it's just saying it's going to replace it. It's going to delete this one, but we do see right here, my file name command line.txt, it's going to rename the file to that basically, because that's the value we passed in there. Okay, that's great. We didn't have to, stop the process there and input a variable name or anything like that. It just ran and included it there inside of our plan, changing our configuration. But imagine this is just one variable here. What if we have 20? What if we have 50 that we have to, it's a very large configuration that we have to work with. Sitting here and doing -var, -var, -var over and over and over is just not practical. And it's going to be a very long command line, very hard to maintain. Not best practices, that's a no-go right there. How else can we pass in the values of our variables? Just like our variable definition here, we can create another Terraform file that has the values that we want to put inside of our variables. Let's go ahead and create another file here. It's going to have a tf-vars file extension, and we'll just call it terraform.tf-vars. And this file is very, very simple. All we're going to do is type in the name of our variable. In this case, the IntelliSense or the autocomplete is going to start picking up, oh, you're wanting to put in some values for variables here. It's suggesting a variable name that I have. So I have file name 1. And then we will say file name from file. We'll say tf-vars. Now again, I'll get to that in just a second. So now we've defined this file here, tf-vars, and we put in our variable name and our value that we want to do here. Let's do this. Let's go back up here and let's see what happens now. Let's just run Terraform plan on its own. No other, command line arguments or anything like that. And you can see it didn't prompt us for variable name. We didn't include it in the command line, but we do see right here, it came and said it picked up our file name variable from our tf-vars file. That's because when you run Terraform plan, not only is it looking for these TF files here for your resource definitions and everything, it's also going to look for TF-vars files and automatically include the values of those into your Terraform configuration. So I didn't have to pass anything in, and I didn't have to input anything in the command line here whenever I went and ran this. It just goes, oh, you have a TF-vars file. That means you're providing me values of variables. I'm going to pick that up and match up our variable names here and just automatically include it. So perfect. Didn't have to do anything there, and it was all just automatic. Let's say you maybe have a bigger environment, or you're working in something like Azure or AWS, and you have multiple environments that you're working with, like a dev or staging or production, and you have multiple TF-vars files that you want to be able to pass in or point out to build out your different environments there, because they have maybe different naming conventions or different sizes of different resources and everything. What you can do is specify a TF-vars file when you run Terraform plan. So what I'm going to do, let's go ahead and copy this file here. We'll just call it dev, pretending we're working in a dev environment here. And my file name is now going to be dev. Now these are at the same level as everything else. Maybe typically you would put this into a separate folder or something for dev, and it has its own TF-vars files. And we'll talk about state files some more, and remote state files, pointing out, where that should live and everything. But right now, we'll just keep it right here at the same level. Just kind of keep it simple. We'll clear that out, and let's bring back up our Terraform plan, and let's actually just run this. I'm curious what's going to happen here. Now, if you notice, it picked up the file name that we have from our TF-vars file. That's because Terraform is going to automatically look in our current directory, and if this specific file name exists, or if you have one that's .auto.tfvars, it's going to load that one. So even though we have this one right here, it just completely ignored it. Let's say I want to create a plan using that different TF-vars file. Let's go back up here and do Terraform plan. And we have another command line argument here of -var file. What we can do is specify dev.tfvars. And if we take a look right here, we can see it picked up the dev for our file name that we have right up here, and put it into our file name. This is another way you can specify a TF-vars file if you have multiples and you want to use them in different scenarios. Again, dev, stage, prod, or just whatever else you're building out there, you can specify a specific TF-vars file inside of your command line whenever you run a plan or apply. Okay, a couple more things I want to point out with variables, and then we'll wrap this video up. Let's close this out, and inside our variables definition, there is one other way to input variable values, and one way to do that is providing a default value. So what I can do is provide a default value, and if you don't, and a default value is exactly that. If you don't provide a value for the file, this is what it's going to use instead. So let's go inside of our TF-vars here. Let's actually delete this so it won't use it. And we'll go ahead and delete this other one here. Now we have a default value. Let's bring this back up. We'll run Terraform plan. Not going to specify anything else. And we can see right here, it's going to use the name my default file.txt because that is our default name. If you don't provide a value through the command line, through a TF-vars file or anything like that, and you have a default value specified, that is what it's going to use. So far, we've been talking about variables that you define and you're going to provide inputs for, but there is one other type of variable or value, and that is a local one. And you can use a local one to maybe manipulate another variable that you have come in or some other data, or just to set something that doesn't require input from whoever's using your Terraform configuration. What we'll do is let's go right up here under some of our provider information, and let's define a local variable. You can see the keyword is locals. And just like our other variable definitions here, you don't have to define what type they are or anything like that, but let's just call this prefix. And what I want my prefix to be, I will say JBT_. In this example, I'm creating a prefix that I want to be in front of any file names that I create. And I guess I could just hard code it right here, but maybe I don't want to use that, or I don't want to have to go update that everywhere. I just want to create a local variable instead. So let's go over here to our file that we've been creating. And to reference a local variable is very similar to how we reference a variable that we're passing in a value for. It is pre-appended with local and then the name of the variable. We'll just do that. Right now we defined a variable called prefix that's local. It's JBT underscore, and we're going to just have that prepend any files that we create. Let's go ahead and clear this out and do another plan and make sure our file name looks as expected here. Yep, and if we take a look here, JBT underscore my default file.txt. So locals are when you want to define a variable that doesn't really require input, or it's not going to change from environment to environment. Let's say I'm taking this configuration and I'm defining servers or something like that, and I always want this prefix to be there, or I want to use it across as like a unique identifier across my different resources or something like that. You can just create a local variable and define it here and then use it within your resources configuration. All right, that does it for variables. That's a very basic introduction here. We didn't even talk about other types of variables or making those definitions. I think as I continue talking about Terraform, and we'll see some more examples of what that will look like. In this case, we just defined a string variable here. You can do some additional things with variables like doing validation to make sure you're getting the answers and the inputs that you want from people who are using your Terraform code. But again, as we just move forward, we'll dive deeper into some of those more advanced topics and everything. This is just a very basic introduction. We defined a variable. We saw how we could use it inside our configuration, and then the different ways we can provide values, either from the command line. If it's just a single variable, we can specify a variable file. If we have a TFRs file and it's named Terraform or Terraform.tfrs or auto.tfrs, it'll automatically load it, or again, specify it as needed. Anyway, that does it for this video. Thank you for watching. Check out the playlist of other Terraform introduction videos that I have going on, and we'll see you next time.